do you think it would make sense to conduct negotiations at the level of the presidents? I think it's very clear to everyone. President Putin never refuses personal contact, but we don't want these contacts to be arranged just for its own sake. We talked about this, by the way, with Mr. Kuleba. Mr. Kuleba highlighted this point that you are raising now, and I reminded him that we are always for meetings in person if we can achieve some added value and if we can resolve the problem. And the Ukrainian government, over the last few years after the anti-constitutional coup, they prefer meetings for the sake of meetings. They prefer to simulate specific agreements through these new contacts with cameras. And you remember these Minsk agreements were completely blocked by the Kiev regime when Zelensky constantly kept saying, let's meet, let's finally meet. And when we reminded our Ukrainian colleagues that in December 2019 there was a Normandy format summit and all the decisions were to be implemented by Kiev and none of them was implemented, they began again repeating the need to meet in person and then we will agree. And then why did we have to meet in Paris if in order to implement the decisions we need to run another summit? So this manner of trying to replace the essence of any problem with this appearances, or we need to have a summit and then we need to invite the British, the Polish, the Americans, and then the Turkish, and now they're trying to do the parallel group of contacts where they would invite Germans and French. They're just a fountain of initiatives, but all of them are explained in a very simple way. They want to replace the actions they need to implement with some show effects. So we did confirm that Putin is not refusing to meet with Zelensky, and at some point that need will be there. But in order for this to happen, we need to do some preliminary work, which is being conducted using Belarus track. We have 3 rounds. We presented our offers, and the Ukrainian side promised to come back to us with the answers. We've got Ukrainian media, public TV of Ukraine, Mr. Lavrov, wherever Russia enters with the attempt to denazify. When you came to Crimea, there were some kidnappings in Tatar groups, but in Azov, in the south, one of the ladies had been kidnapped, Miss Ibrahimova. So you are moving to another level. Over the last 8 years, we did not kidnap any women. What would you say to this? These are facts. So this is my region, Melitopol, where I grew up. You said that these are facts, but I think significantly there's another word starting with F, which is fakes. And internet and the airwaves have been filled up with these fakes. I did not know about this alleged story about the kidnapping of a public representative, but the manners that the Kiev regime is famous with. Shevchenko disappeared yesterday, I understand. Kiev was just assassinated, and they say he was assassinated by the security services of Ukraine because of the treason, and then they said there were some kind of other problems. So if we deal with all these individual stories, we will find lots of very shocking facts. But if you take one episode and if you just try to agitate public opinion on that basis, including here in Turkey, in order to establish the anti-Russian policy. This is again trying to replace real serious conversation with this show effects. And I have not heard about this particular case. You can give me all sorts of names and surnames and so on. I wanted to say that I will inquire, but I have not heard about this. I heard about Shevchenko, which disappeared in Kiev, and I heard about... I'm sorry, this is not an interview, this is a press conference. We need to allow the Italian agency to... I think you had been filmed already, and you'll be shown very clearly on your own TV. You've achieved your goal now. Our Italian colleagues, please, if we can give the microphone. We talked about AGI, Italian agency. Many thanks. This is democracy, Maria. Those who want, they just take the mic. I talked about this. I mentioned that we are very concerned. All this information that came to light, that Pentagon has created a few dozens of biological laboratories on the Ukrainian territory as part of their program of creating these laboratories all over the world in violation of the Convention on Prohibition of Biochemical Weapons. And we did send an inquiry to requiring explanations. And the fact that they used their biological weapons, I don't have any facts to that, but I'd like to... But it's quite clear that this is ethnically oriented development of biological weapons, and this was the goal of these laboratories. Izvestia, microphone. United States openly stating that they told their ambassadors to persuade other countries to join sanctions. Did you instruct your own ambassadors to do the same? This isolation of the West, is it in their own heads? Or? We are briefing our ambassadors in great detail. We talk about facts in relation to one situation or another situation, and our ambassadors are conveying this information to the powers of the country where they work, running around the world and trying to force independent sovereign countries, members of UN, to execute the order of the bigger brother. This is not in our traditions. We are very polite people, and Americans are not hiding the fact that they are demanding from Turkey, from India, Egypt, Southeast Asia, and even China. From China, they are requiring to join the sanctions. This sort of disrespect to great civilizations, to great countries, I could not even imagine that. But you can see that for Americans, there are no forbidden things, and we are not engaging in such work. Sky News? Sky News? This is Italian Sky News. This is the original one. As for the hospital and maternity wards, I talked about this, but you didn't listen to this, and you're not going to show this. And nobody will say that 3 days ago at the Security Council of the United Nations, we explained what happened to that maternity ward. As for the statements, who is going to do what and who is not going to do what, until the last moment, we wanted to resolve the matter in a diplomatic way. We presented an extensive document on our bilateral agreement with the US and also NATO, and also covered all the questions on European security, including all countries on the continent, including Ukraine. We were told that Ukraine is ours, and we will deal with Ukraine, and we will resolve the future of Ukraine. And we proposed we proposed not creating any threats on the ground in Ukraine to the Russian Federation. And Putin explained very clearly why he took that decision to conduct this special military operation. And even if you're not allowed to talk to your listeners about this, you could yourself read this document and understand our logic. It's very clearly explained. We want a Ukraine which will be friendly, demilitarized Ukraine, which would not create any threats for creating a Nazi state, Ukraine where there would be a Russian culture and language, and the Orthodox Church is not forbidden, is not banned. All of that was reflected in their laws, and all our calls, all our attempts to contact with our Western colleagues to influence the Ukrainians on this, they failed. And when the Ukraine passed a law where only Ukrainian is fit for use on the territory of their territory, and all other languages were discriminated against in school, in other universities, and Hungary and Bulgaria started to express their discontent. And Ukraine then made an exception in a very elegant way, exception out of this law for European Union languages, and only Russian was left as a discriminated language. And the West went quiet. It just emphasizes the fact that West is only interested in Ukraine working against anything that is Russian. What the West has done in relation to the referendum in Crimea, this is a double standard. There was no referendum in Kosovo, but NATO created a situation where, by bombing Yugoslavia, they created the conditions for Kosovo. And when they wanted independence, the whole West just applauded it and supported it. Why Albanians can do this and Russians can't do this? Albanians in Yugoslavia, they were not just allowed to do this, they were stimulated, they were pushed in that direction. And they had this, the purpose of United Kingdom and other countries was not to have too large a country in the Baltic, in the Balkans, and they have the same goal in relation to Russia. And we understand that this is not about Ukraine, this is about the aggression against anything Russian. Interests, religion, language, culture, safety, and all other things. And of course now, the reaction of the West to our actions, a very aggressive reaction. And this is, it really demonstrates the fact that this is a fight for life. CCTV Chinese channel. I said already at the beginning that we came here not in order to substitute the negotiations track that was created by the Russian president and the Ukrainian president, and that is being conducted in Belarus. It is there that all practical issues are being discussed. It is there that everything had been clarified, what needs to be done in order to finish this crisis, demilitarization, denazification, neutral status of Ukraine, and a number of other things. And this is where business negotiations are taking place. We warned our colleagues right at the beginning of this meeting that we're not going to create a parallel track as Ukrainian side probably wants to do. For this reason, they always try to substitute real work with creating new formats that, of course, need to take the main center stage in the news, and that just simulates real work. As for this is as far as our today's event goes, and I'm not surprised by the fact that Kuleba said that we did not agree on ceasefire. Nobody was going to negotiate the ceasefire here. All the steps and all the proposals are very well known to the Ukrainian side. And if the purpose of the meeting was to ask this sort of questions, let's start the ceasefire, let's create the humanitarian corridors according to the Ukrainian side and so on. And if all of this is being done in order to say to the media so that, oh, look, all our good intentions have failed, that's probably the case. That is part of the Ukrainian diplomacy and all these special effects that are that have the goal to affect the public opinion and the media. I think I touched upon this issue already, how we're going to deal. I think your colleague from asked this question. I said that we will resolve this issue and we will resolve it in such a way that we're not dependent on our Western partners in the future, whether these are governments or companies who are not guided by the interests of their business. They are just tools of the political aggression that Russia is feeling from the West now. We will do everything possible not to be in this situation ever again, so that no person, no Uncle Sam or anybody else could do anything to destroy our economy. And we will find ways to do this. And this is long overdue. And there was another question. Sanctions. Yeah, and as for oil and gas, again, we are leaving this to the decision of our colleagues. We never used oil and gas as weapon, and that's something that is we're being charged with. In 2010, I think there was a crisis when Ukrainian authorities started to just steal the transit gas to Europe because they stopped paying for their own gas. We were supplying gas to Europe in full volume, and they were just stealing it. Do you think Ukraine? Do you think Europe tried to dissuade them? No, they started to say, "Oh, Russia is using it as weapon." But again, I'd like to reiterate: everything that is happening in relation to Ukraine is measured through one criteria: how can we harm Russia? How can we contain Russia using Ukraine? And this policy has been there for a long time. Europe um, is another thing that characterizes European values. They are they are cursing us. They are applying sanctions, and they ran away. And then they say, "Oh, we're going to buy oil and gas because we're going to get cold." Our vice prime minister who regulating, who are overseeing this industry, he said that we're not going to try to persuade them to try to buy oil and gas from us. If they want to replace it with something else, that's fine. We have our sales market elsewhere. I answered this question whether we were going to react to what countries are doing when they supply weapons to Ukraine. We believe that these countries are creating a colossal threat for themselves when they are passing the most dangerous weapons, uh, these portable rocket launchers, and when they are witnessing how Ukrainian authorities are just giving out weapons to everyone without any control. We never said that we would have any plans in relation to NATO countries. My colleague, new colleague, Lisa Truss, talked about this, where she stated that if Putin does not lose in Ukraine, then his ambitions will be unlimited, and his next targets would be Baltics and Moldova. We're not saying this. This is Elizabeth Truss, who is famous for her statements, but when she talks about Baltics and Poland, I think this is just part of British diplomacy. This is when it's in line with that tradition when they faked the Peter the First will when the British wrote that. Kolesnikov from Kommersant. Today, it's becoming possible what was impossible to imagine yesterday. Do you believe that nuclear war can start? I do not want to believe in this, and I don't believe in this. I would like to emphasize that the nuclear topic in the context of the Ukrainian events over the last few years and this topic was introduced exclusively by Western representatives. First of all, NATO representatives. Lisa Truss also talked about not excluding conflict between NATO and Russia. I don't know how can you make statements like this. and Stoltenberg was also making statements. I don't know whether he's making statements without agreeing them with all NATO members. And he said that if we could place nuclear weapons in Eastern Europe, and Baudrillard also said, my French colleague, he said that Putin should remember that France is also a nuclear power, and they also stated that the total war had been announced by the West against Russia. And I said that when there was a question about alternative, one of the Western leaders said that the only alternative. Biden said the only alternative is a nuclear war. They constantly have that in their subconscious, this nuclear war, and it's like a Freudian slip that they keep coming back to. Last question, Khabar, please. Tokayev, president of Kazakhstan, proposed Kazakhstan as the platform for negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Is Russia considering this, and when are the next negotiations possible? Russia, as I said at the beginning of our press conference, is very grateful to everyone who, out of their goodwill, are proposing conditions to regulate the current internal Ukrainian crisis, and to everyone who is prepared to help find solutions, taking into account all the concerned parties on the basis of balance of interests. The most important thing is that these proposals, and our Turkish friends, our friends from Kazakhstan, they are making those proposals based on goodwill. We don't want Ukrainian side to use these proposals as an excuse. They have this tradition of using these sort of new initiatives as ways of replacing real action. I remember they were proposing a Turkish platform, and what was behind that was the desire not to implement the measures or to do its work, and to replace it with show effects. But if there is added value, we said this. President Putin said that many times. We are happy to use those formats, but they should not just be used for the sake of using some new format. Yes, we are very serious. You see, it's a third time that I'm being asked about the maternity ward, and third time they want to hear. They don't want to hear the answer, and you are not listening to this answer again. I said the third time that I had been asked about the maternity ward, and it looks like you did not hear what I wanted to reply, and your key media in the West, they're just making headlines out of this. We did say on the 7th of March there were no children or women in this maternity ward, and this maternity ward was taken over by Azov, and they created a base there. It's the same way as they're behaving all over Ukraine. They are turning people into human shields. They are turning civilian neighborhoods into their strongholds, and they're placing artillery there, and they're attacking the forces of Donetsk and Lugansk from there. But as for our proposals are very serious. We did put these proposals back in December, 15th of December, and these were proposals about the system of security, and it wasn't a new system. It was just an implementation of what had been agreed at the highest political level, including OSCE summit in 1999 in Istanbul, and Astana 2010. It was written in black and white that any country can choose an alliance, but nobody has the right to strengthen its security at the expense of other countries' security. And this was part of the formula. And you mentioned diplomacy. This was the pinnacle of democracy, and this was signed by Russia, by our neighbors, and by the free world, so-called. And there were signatures. Nobody is going to strengthen its security at the expense of other countries' security. And no organization, no country on the European field needs to try to be the dominant force, as NATO is trying to do currently, and violating this principle. And when our proposal to sign an agreement between Russia and NATO, where the principles are being implemented, not just taken out of thin air, but the principles taken out of these documents, documents having legal force, instead of replying to us at the level of states, we received a document from Borrell and Stoltenberg, half a page, where it said that yeah, don't worry about that, we are prepared to talk and so on. But the fact that these obligations had been signed, and NATO and European Union, it had nothing to do with this. They said it was the individual countries had to do this, and they just delegated all authority to the General Secretary of NATO, and they just placed the whole responsibility for that on him. This is what was done to diplomacy. This is something that was done to it by your Western representatives. Of course, we want diplomacy now to resolve all the issues, but this time we explained very clearly that demilitarization of Ukraine, we need denazification of Ukraine, and we can't do without this, because the threats that were being created on the territory of this country for the Russian Federation was direct military, cultural, informational threat, language threat, if you want, civilization threat to Russia. And it had a very urgent character to it. And we are dealing with our partners in a very honest way. And if our partners were the same, we would have resolved everything. However, we don't see the partners who are prepared to conduct matters in a very honest way. However, there were attempts to do this, and I'm hoping those leaders who are now very active in relation to what's going on in Ukraine, I hope that they realize the existential threat to the whole European security, which is caused by their inaction and their lack of desire to implement the agreements. We never wanted war, and we want to end the war based on the interests of the republics that refused to accept the results of the military coup in 2014, and they witnessed how the representatives of this regime were burning people alive in Odessa and were bombing people in Lugansk. And over these last 8 years, they were shelling schools and kindergartens and hospitals, and we've got lots of evidence of this because our journalists, and great respect to them, many of them died there, they did show everything that was happening there. And Western journalists practically did not go to that contact line, and they never showed how the actual situation of the people on that side. 70% of all the damage was concentrated on the side of these republics. It was once that representative of BBC did come to that side of the border, and they did report quite objectively, but covering this topic on a daily basis, and covering this topic in the United Nations, and direct refusal of implementation of Minsk agreements. I don't remember anybody covering that in the West. And what you are covering now in Ukraine, in relation to Ukraine, and if we contrast it to what was said over the last 7 to 8 years in that area, I think that would be quite telling if we contrast it with all that information. And we see that all these decisions that we're taking at the highest level are not really respected. My colleagues, thank you very much. We would like to finish our press conference with this.